The first work we're going to look at is Dome of the Rock, which is in Jerusalem. Let's take a minute and I want you to look at this. You can pause the video and describe what you see for form. So we have an octagon shape from the outside. You can see it's covered with mosaics of blue and green and yellow. It has columns at the entrance and arched windows. It has a large golden dome, and the little thing at the top is called a finial. On the finial, it has the shape of a crescent moon, which is a symbol associated with Islam. So this is called, in an area in Jerusalem, referred to as the noble enclosure. So you can see it's on a raised platform above the rest of the city. And I'm going to talk about the significance of this. But this area, this is a very, very holy site for Islam. It's one of the oldest Islamic buildings in the world. And we'll talk about the meaning of this. So a little bit of context. Jerusalem was part of the Byzantine Empire, but it was conquered by the Umayyad Muslim dynasty in the 600s. And so it's one of the earliest surviving buildings from the Islamic world. And scholars tend to believe that when the Umayyads took over and conquered the Byzantines, who were Christian, they wanted to build something that would really show like the dominance of Islam and how this new faith of Islam was going to take over the world. And so perhaps they wanted to build a monument that would be seen from all different parts of the city and have this huge dome that would really stand out. In terms of the function, this is not a mosque. So that's a common misconception. There is a mosque, like you see here on the noble enclosure. There is a mosque up there, but this building is not a mosque itself. This is also a holy site to other religions. So one of the things you can see here that's highlighted is the Western Wall. This is called the Temple Mount for Jews, which is where the main Jewish temple in Jerusalem was located. That temple, the second temple, was destroyed when the Romans put down a Jewish revolt in Jerusalem. And so for Jews, the Western Wall is like the remaining, they believe the remaining part of that temple, which is one of their, or is their holiest site. So here is a drawing of where the original Jewish temple might have been. So you can see the Dome of the Rock in the middle, the octagon part, and then the temple was probably over that site. Within the temple, there was a part that was called the Holy of Holies, which was the place where Jews believed that God actually dwelled. And so they, only the priests could go in there, and like only, I think, one day a year. It was the holiest site in all of Judaism. And so for Jews, this is a big deal because they today don't go on this area of the Dome of the Rock because they don't want to walk on the land that is the Holy of Holies. So there's a lot of, as you can imagine, dispute throughout history over this site. On the right side is an illustration of what that temple, Jewish temple, might have originally looked like. This is also an important site for Christians. So in the background here, you see the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This, some Christians believe, is where Jesus's tomb was, and so a church was built on this location. And so possibly when the Umayyads took over, they wanted to build they wanted to build the Dome of the Rock to tower even over this really important Christian church. Here's a close-up of some of the mosaics on the outside. So you can add that to form or to content if you didn't already do that. But on the outside, there's these mosaics that have blues and greens and golds and teals. And like we talked about, in Muslim religious architecture, they don't believe in putting figures of animals or humans. And so they have a lot of geometric designs, designs that are kind of like plant motifs, and also writings. And so here we have Arabic writing. Here's another image of one of the archways and the arched windows with all the mosaics around them. And another important note, in some of the writing here, there are verses from the Quran. So one part of the Dome of the Rock has an inscription that's over 240 meters long, and it has some of the earliest surviving examples of verses from the Quran, including some of the Shahada, which is the Muslim profession of faith or confession of faith, that states there's one God and Muhammad is his prophet, which is like a really important part of the Muslim faith. So this is built shortly after, I mean, not that long after Muhammad died. And so to have this surviving verse from that time period is really significant. And here's a close-up of the finial, which is the top point of the dome. And you can see on the top there's a symbol that's kind of like a crescent moon, which is associated with Islam. So let's go inside and talk about what this building actually is, because if it's not a mosque, what is it? So inside, in the floor, is this huge rock. So when we call it Dome of the Rock, it's literally a dome built over this rock. So this is important to Muslims. They believe that this commemorates the night journey of Muhammad, which is called the Miraj, M-I-R-A-J. And so they believe that one night Muhammad was near the Kaaba in Mecca, and the angel Gabriel came to him and took him to this faraway mosque in Jerusalem. And from this rock that he journeyed to heaven, where he met important prophets such as Moses and Jesus. And he also saw paradise, or heaven, and hell, and saw God enthroned and surrounded by angels. So he basically visited God and all these important religious figures. And so this site, the Dome of the Rock, is just like a building commemorating that. Now, if you look at the picture on the right, it shows you that there's actually 2 ambulatories. So remember when we looked at the centrally planned church in San Vitale and we learned the word ambulatory, which is like an aisle that goes around? This one has 2, you can see, concentric ambulatories around the rock. So Muslims, when they go in here, in addition to prayer, they can circumambulate around this important site. You can also see here that there is a colonnade. So in the inner ambulatory around the rock, there's a colonnade with arches. We can also refer to this as an arcade when it's a series of arches. So there's a colonnade, also called an arcade, surrounding the rock, and then there's a second ambulatory just beyond that. And some art historians think that the shape itself is a reference to earlier tombs, because Roman emperors such as Augustus and Hadrian had mausoleums that were kind of this octagonal or round shape with a dome on it. And then, of course, in the background, we looked at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre that has that similar shape. And so perhaps they were, even though making a Muslim building and bringing in some new elements, kind of influenced by those earlier styles. And over that is this large dome. And here is the large dome above the rock. You can see it has very, very intricate mosaics, and it's thought that these mosaics were made by Byzantine artisans, which would make sense because they're borrowing a lot of the style from the Byzantines, like from churches like San Vitale or Hagia Sophia. They have a lot of that same quality, especially the gold and the very, very intricate designs. You can also see that the architects included windows in the dome, so that's the main source of light that comes in and would make all the mosaics glitter and sparkle. So now we're going to move on to the Great Mosque of Córdoba. So you can find that slide. You can pause the video if you need to get to that. And I'll just be honest, College Board has given us a lot of required images for Mosque of Córdoba, and I don't really feel like they're all necessary. So if you feel like you have some notes for some parts and then not a lot for others, that's perfectly fine. So I'll give you a little background on this one, and you could put it at the top, or you could put it next to the picture that looks like this. So let me just say, first of all, this site has been through a lot of changes. So in the time of the Roman Empire, there was a Roman temple here. Then Rome became Christian and a church was built here. Then Spain was conquered by Muslims and it was turned into a mosque, which is what we're going to talk about. And then when Spain was reconquered by Christians, it was turned back into a church. So there's been a lot of change in this area. So let's talk about this as a mosque and when and who it was built by. So this was built by the Umayyads, which were a Muslim empire, and they were in the Middle East as well, but later on some of the Umayyad family went to Spain and established an independent kingdom there. So the Umayyad dynasty in Spain was founded around 750 CE. The capital of that dynasty was Córdoba, which is the city that we're looking at here. Now, you might remember from history class that a lot of achievements of the time in math and astronomy and literature and all of these amazing things were going on in the Muslim empires in the Middle East in cities like Baghdad. Córdoba was the same kind of place. Like, it had one of the largest libraries in the world, for example. So it was a really, really significant place of Muslim culture. If you go there today, it's often referred to as the mezquita, which is just the word for mosque. And there's evidence of when it was turned into a church. So you can see the tower, the large bell tower, that was originally the minaret, which, remember, on the Hagia Sophia, we had minarets after it was turned into a mosque, which is where they would do the call to prayer from. And then they covered the minaret to make it look more like a Christian bell tower after it was reconquered in the 1200s. So here's another image of it, and here's a little bit about the plan. So you can see it's been added to many times, and we'll look at the inside in a minute. But it has a large hypostyle hall, which, remember, is a hall held up by many, many columns. And then it also has a large courtyard surrounded by a wall. Here's an image of the courtyard, and the Muslim empire, the Umayyads, when they conquered this and built this mosque here, they actually imported orange trees from the Middle East to remind them of their homeland. And some of those, I don't know if they're the same ones, but there are still orange trees in this courtyard. Here's another image of it, and you just have to think about, I think it's easy for us to understand because we live in South Texas, how hot Spain is in the summer. And so this would be like a nice place where you could kind of collect yourself and feel the breeze. There's fountains in the courtyard like you see here. Before you go into the mosque to pray, you can kind of have a more relaxing or centering experience in the courtyard. And here's one of the entrances, which is one of the images you have. To be honest, I don't know why why they included this image, but it is one of the original entryways, and so we have the original architecture and the archways and the horseshoes and all of this style that's part of the mosque at Córdoba. Okay, this is what this mosque is probably most famous for, are these striped horseshoe arches. So this is inside the hypostyle prayer hall. And again, hypostyle is a hall held up by many columns. Part of this shows that this was a site that was used over and over because part of these columns use recycled Roman columns. And you can see there's 2 tiers of arches, one on top of the other. The horseshoe arch was a type that was really favored by the Visigoths, who were one of the tribes that conquered the Roman Empire. And so they probably kind of borrowed some of that style from them. Here's another image of this, and another vocabulary word is vousar, which you see at the bottom there, which is like the wedge-shaped stones that make up this. Okay, so in the inside of the mosque, we're going to learn some terms that will apply to other mosques that we're going to study. The first one is mihrab, which is written on the screen. So this is a term that denotes which wall is the Qibla wall. So Qibla is Qibla, and we learned previously that that is the direction that faces Mecca. So in a mosque, there's usually some kind of niche or something that's called a mihrab that shows people this is the direction that you need to turn and pray. So that's always the focal point of any kind of prayer hall in the mosques that we're going to look at. So it identifies the wall that faces Mecca. And you can see this one has just really, really ornate mosaics around it. Probably it's thought that they were also done by Byzantine artists because of the style and the gold. You can also see, and I'll show you a close-up in a minute, of the all the scriptures that are written here and verses from the Quran. And then another term to know is maksura. Maksura is in the mosque an enclosure or like a little area that is for the ruler or other important people. And the idea of that is just really to protect them. Like if people know that they're going to pray and they could potentially face an assassination or something like that, it's like a protected area for the ruler or other important dignitaries. So here's a picture of the dome that's right above the mihrab. So if you were looking at that niche or you were like right in front of it and you looked straight up, you would see this dome. And you can see it's a ribbed dome. Lots and lots of golden mosaics with crisscrossing ribs and pointed archways above the windows. And then you can see under that the verses from the Quran that are written out in the mosaic. And here's some more images of that. So it's really, I think it's just really cool. It's like stylized, almost like stylized writing with these verses from the Quran. And also, like we saw in other Islamic architecture so far, we have, in addition to verses from the Quran, lots of geometric patterns. And then at the bottom, vegetal design. So we see like plants and vines. That kind of thing is called vegetal.